Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. I do want to remind folks that we are recording this session and that your consent to the recording is implied if you decide to stay on. However, the recording is only shared with the appropriate parties when necessary. When you do get a moment, if you can go ahead and open up the chat box and just send us a quick hello, good morning, just to let us know that you're here, your chat box is working, that you can hear everything, you can see everything. We'll get started in just a few moments. Good morning, everyone. We will get started in just a moment. I do want to let folks know that we are recording this session and that your consent to the recording is implied if you decide to stay on and participate. However, the recording is only shared with the appropriate parties when necessary. I do want to remind folks that have entered into the room, if you could go ahead and open up the chat box just to send us a quick hello or good morning. We just want to make sure that you can see everything, that you can hear everything, you're not having any technical difficulties. My name is Tiara. I'll be your tech host today. If you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to shoot me a message in the chat, and I'll also post my email address as well if you need to shoot me an email. And I will go ahead and pass it all to our presenters to get started today.
Great, thank you, Tiara. My name is Jen Lowther. I'm with the Institute for Innovation and Implementation at the School of Social Work at University of Maryland, and we're here today to meet for the Maryland Mobile Response and Stabilization Services Quality Improvement Collaborative. Quite the mouthful. This is the sixth time that we've convened in 2022. We come together every other month and really look forward to having additional folks join and folks returning. And just to let everyone know, all of these sessions, as Tiara mentioned, are recorded and we have them logged. So we will send out both a recording for this today as well as past recordings if you need to catch up on any of the content. If you can move to the next slide. So today, we can keep checking our chat function, and as we wait for folks to come on, if you could put in your name and your organization, agency, and the county in which you work, that would be really helpful. And just for fun, if you want to enter your favorite Thanksgiving side dish, since it's coming up next week, I know mine is a very addictive side dish. It's creamed leeks with crusted breadcrumbs on the top. It is incredibly delicious and look forward to it. Quite sinful every year. So please share any fun side dishes that you're looking forward to next week. And we won't talk about the diet plans after that, at least I know. With the cream leek, I will be needing to be doing that. So thank you for your fun here. And we'll just pause here for a moment to let folks see this and enter the content. Great. Okay. Moving on to the agenda on the next slide. So today we will have a very similar format we have each time we meet. We will have some BHA updates, which will be very helpful from Maria Radowski-Stanko. And then we will move into our services to support best practice content. We're focusing on the third phase of crisis system this time. So moving into that content, the last previous sessions have been on the first two phases. So we are moving into this now. We then are very excited to have a national speaker, Tim Marshall, presenting on the stabilization and linkage in Connecticut. So that's really exciting for you all to hear that information as well after Liz Manley presents on best practice. And then we'll have a breakout group of 3 groups this time. So please join your appropriate group where you work or where your provider works as we put those on the screen to have some conversations on the heels of the stabilization content. And then we'll have quick TA training updates and closing at that point. Feel free at any time to enter questions in the chat. We will try to answer them as we go along. And I'm sure the presenters will pause also between their presentations to answer any questions as we go. So I will now turn it over to Maria and get things started. Thank you.
Sure. No chat. I'm Maria Radowski-Stanko. I'm the Director of Child, Adolescent, Young Adult Services here, and talking a little bit about where we are with MRSS implementation, as well as providing some quick updates from the data work group. So next slide. So talking about how MRSS is aligning across the state. We're invested in kind of leveraging our resources and streamlining our services, making this a comprehensive system of care that works. So using models and interventions across all child serving systems. To that, also across all child serving agencies. DHS and BHA are partnering toward one aligned crisis response model, the MRSS Mobile Response Stabilization Services model for children. And really using this to leverage our funding across the state. So blending together some historic funding we had from DHS and new funding we have, and moving forward in a coherent, unified fashion. This is really exciting. I mean, this is 2 agencies that historically have been somewhat uncomfortable bedfellows. We've had some differences, and really coming together and saying, we both buy into this model, we're doing this, we're moving forward. And that's pretty cool. So BHA is sharing their training and coaching resources to support that MRSS model. So we're providing this to all of our mobile response entities that are out there, and being open to, sort of the DSS model and funding to say, hey, we're going to take your funding, we're going to bring that in with ours, and we're going to provide your, the training that's needed to serve your youth as well. The expectation is for our providers to start where they are in their implementation of mobile interventions, and to learn the best practices and prepare for a broad statewide MRSS installation. We get questions sometimes of, well, how many counties is this up and running in? Where is this happening? I'm like, it's more that we're training everybody. And, we can get back to you with exactly who's where and where they are, but the idea is we're working toward this end goal, and that's where we're going to get to. So this is a great time to make changes in our system. Here we're going. Mobile response stabilization alignment across the state. 988 is going to play a critical role in aligning and connecting with MRSS. So 988 is going to be our place you call, the place where the calls come in, then they triage out to our mobile response teams, as that happens. Through technical assistance, national best practice triage protocols are going to be shared. We're going to come up with what it is we're doing in Maryland. And I see my DHS partners are on here, and I'm going to apologize for myself for saying anything that maybe have been inappropriate or a little rocky there. But hopefully we all understand that we really are working together, and I think that's just such a great step forward. So next slide. Sharing triage and training practices with partners in Maryland. We're asking our mobile providers and our locals to let us know what's going on in the way of triage and call center policies and procedures, and give us any training plans you have. And using that as a starting point to really help flesh out what's needed and what we want to have going on across Maryland, and not only for the child space, but across the lifespan, but really want to make sure that for children and families, they're getting that response regardless of what's going on, regardless of whether it's really a full acuity of risk to self and others, but that those families are getting a response when they call and ask for help. That's critical to the MRSS model, and we want to make sure that that's happening across the state. So next slides. Pivoting now into the CAT tool and the data collection piece. Asking if you and your staff have been trained in the CAT tool during the initial 3 cohorts of training, March, May, and September. We would really like you to be using the CAT in practice for mobile response to all families, and completing the CAT feedback survey at the link at the bottom so that we can make modifications to tool and make sure it's aligning with the adult CAT model, which is coming out. And this is all, again, this idea of continuous improvement, baby steps to make something better to what's working. So we want to hear from you what is and is not working. Continuing on data updates, approval. We've gotten approval to move forward with a statewide data system. I know there's some elements that have come out of the data work group from the whole, again, lifespan crisis work to say this is what we've agreed upon. This is what we want to moving forward to. Interim data system is underway in development with BHA's IT team to be collecting some of this information for mobile crisis and crisis stabilization services. So again, that whole continuum, someone to call, place, somebody to respond, place to go. The stabilization is part of that for a lifespan, and getting the same data across this and having it come through BHA and getting some honest data that we can start providing to people about what is and isn't working. Planning together individual client level with limited data elements so that the burden is not going to be overwhelming to providers, but we need to be getting some of that information consistently across the state. Okay, next slide. Okay, so open just for any quick questions that are in the chat there. Looks like people are still introducing themselves. Okay.
Great, thank you, Maria.
I think I had a little too much caffeine this morning. I'm a little quick.
That's okay. That is all right. Yeah, if anybody, as we go along, circle back, have questions about how all of this applies to Maryland, feel free to stick in the chat and we'll just answer it as we go along. So get ready for this ride of lots of content, and do grab your cup of coffee now if you haven't. So we'll pass it on to Liz for this great information.
You got it. You got it. I'm happy to join you today. I'm Liz Manley. I'm a senior advisor for health and behavioral policy at the Institute for Innovation and Implementation at the University of Maryland. Very happy to join you today on mobile response and stabilization. For folks who haven't joined us before, I'm also the former assistant commissioner for New Jersey's Children's System of Care, which has 24/7 access across the full population of children in New Jersey for mobile response and stabilization, which has really been in place in New Jersey for statewide since 2006. So we have some real understanding what these best practices really look like. So again, I'm happy to join you today. And the way that we start this conversation is really to think about the second component, right? We talked a lot in the past about the 72 hours, someone to respond. We talked about the single point of access and a couple of other things that I think hopefully have helped you understand what this all means and what it looks like and why it's different for children, recognizing what's the same within a crisis response system. So in talking about children and families, we want to talk about stabilization from the perspective of we want things to be stable within the home, and we want young people to feel safe and stable. We want their families to feel supported, but in the systems of support, we're also thinking about long-term sustainability, right? So in putting together a plan for parent caregiver for the young person themselves, we're not just thinking within these short windows of time, this 24-hour time, the 72-hour time, that 8 weeks of stabilization even, we're really thinking into the future, because when you're talking about young people and their families, we're actually in a really unique position to be able to help young people be able to address even long-term challenges with some tools right up front. So when we think about this work, even from a data perspective, our impact of mobile response and stabilization is not just in the short term, it's really in the long term of what happens for young people and their family and their experiences over time. Next slide, please. So a system to support, which is really that third prong in the SAMHSA work that has sometimes talked about a place to go, or talked about a system, a safe place to be. We in the children's world, and folks like me have been working in the mobile world for a long time, and I think you'll hear this from my friend Tim Marshall in a bit, is that systems to support really means that we want to keep our children in their own homes, in their own schools, in their own communities, and the ability to get that child back into their own school as quickly as possible has implications for the long-term impact for them, right? So the idea that we want to be able to provide the right supports in time for that young person is really important. And the way that we think about that is in the system to support and stabilization services in particular. We're talking about up to 8 weeks. And, you know, some folks have done up to 6 weeks. I don't know that we want to argue in the impact or effectiveness of the 6 to 8 week issue. I know for sure in the world, in New Jersey, up to 8 weeks has been helpful, but it's also helpful when we think about a system to support. It's not just what happens within that period of time, that up to 8 week period of time. It's what happens later because of the work that happens in this moment of time in that stabilization services. So what it means is that the team who's working is going to work on a care plan and a care plan development and implementation that's based on the assessment that was done in the 72-hour period, right? With the flags that have come up within the crisis assessment tool that say, look, we're worried about these things. There can be continued exploration around other folks who might be helpful in understanding what's been going on for the young person and their family. But there's also this information that's put into a care plan with some ideas and strategies that are really important. What's also important to think about is some of these grounding principles that we're talking about around teaming, around bringing folks together, are based in the idea that we're going to use a team in order to make some decisions. And we're going to help support the young person and their family with other folks around the table, right? And those other folks, informal folks, other family members, they can be community members who are bringing to the table, or they can be formal supports at this point that are important. And that we're talking about the community in this sort of care coordination in-home clinical support model. So for not all young people require in-home clinical support, but some do. Not all young people require formal interventions, but some do. But what all folks really need is the ability to coordinate across systems, right? And for children, those across systems include making sure that there's engagement with the local school, you know, the child's school, engagement with their pediatrician, their natural child serving support system, right? Are they engaged in other activities that we might need to bring to the table that are really important? So we really want to set the table in a way that we're saying we want families to be at this table, we want the young person to be at this table, and we're going to be thinking about what this 8 weeks of time is going to look like through a care planning process, and then putting both formal and informal things into place as they've been determined necessary. And then we're going to review and update that assessment on a regular period of time, right? So we want to make sure that we were able to get all of the information in that crisis assessment tool, the CAT, that really plays into the care plan. And then the next part of that is really making sure that there in the updates that there's progress moving towards the areas that were flagged, we're addressing those flags, and that we may have identified other flags within the process. And that there's sustainable support. In other words, we don't want to just put things in place for that 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then step back and say, sorry, we can't help you, right? The goal here is around coordination across systems, but it's also about making sure that the plan has sustainable interventions in them, right? And includes those informal and community connections, which are so important for our child's healing. And then the connection to services and supports for youth with complex needs is included in this conversation. So what happens as you bump into young people who have truly complex behavioral health needs? Who do we connect to? Like, what does that look like, right? And that should not be a process in which mobile sits in this siloed kind of world, and then other support services for young people with complex behavioral health needs sit someplace else. There's this real understanding that both mobile response and stabilization, things like targeted case management, high fidelity wraparound, youth and peer support, that these are all transformational tools that sit within a system of care that talks to each other and works across together to make sure that young people don't fall through the cracks. Next slide, please. So part of this includes the face-to-face, right? So stabilization services, when we get to that place where the 72 hours has been completed, we've made the determination that a young person needs more in order for them to be able to be successful. We identify that as face-to-face whenever necessary, right? So that may happen twice or 3 times within that 8-week period of time, may happen every single day, whatever is necessary for that family. There's going to be this idea that we're going to actually get out and see young people face to face. In some innovations, and this is where some telehealth technology might be helpful, in particular in the more rural parts of Maryland, that we may want to do some of those touch-ins, virtually if we're prepared to do it. But we still want to make sure that we've been in the home, that we've seen the child's bedroom, that we understand what the dynamics in the environment, not just in the home, but in the community, right? We want to have a feel and understanding of the community that the young person lives in. That we want to truly understand the community supports, right? So, and this is where the work for mobile response teams needs to be really focusing on the communities that you're serving to make sure that you know where all those informal and formal supports sit and how we engage with them. That there may be clinical support that's necessary. There are a couple different models to talk about around that. One model might be that you use independent practitioners who go in to the home. It could be that you use the mobile response teams might be playing part of that role, or you may be using other tools in Maryland around other clinical interventions that might be available. What you want to be thinking about is who's going to be doing that clinical intervention and clinical work. And we're happy to talk a little bit more about those models in our future conversations around stabilization services. And that you really want to be thinking about using some tools around evidence-informed care coordination. And what that means is that we're actually going to come to the table in a way that says we want to make sure that the care coordination that's provided is going to get us the outcomes that we're looking for. Okay, next slide, please. I think there's a question that came up, so let me just see. Yeah, I'm going to take it right now. So Rachel, you said seeing the bedroom, do we think that could potentially cause fear amongst the parents, like being judged or feeling like their children could be taking from them? Yeah, it's a really good question, and it should be part of how we set the stage for this work. Remember that part of mobile response and stabilization is that the parent and caregivers played a role in asking for the service, that they're already on board and saying that this is really necessary. And so how we approach, and I'm going to get to some of the engagement strategies, is really important in making sure that parents feel comfortable. What we don't want our parents to believe that when we arrive at the door, our goal is to take their child away or harm them and their family in any way. Our goal is to be helpers. But we can talk more about that. So the care planning, right, is really a focus on engagement. This is really about how do we engage young people, how do we engage families, how do we engage other family members who may not be sitting at the table. As an example, and this is a common example that we saw a lot in New Jersey, where families would be alienated. The child couldn't go to their grandparents' birthday party because their behavior was so extreme, and that the parents were worried or embarrassed on their child's behavior. So what do? We want to actually get to a place in which those parents, right, these are parents and caregivers and young people themselves are not feeling isolated. So how do we bring those grandparents, how do we bring those other relatives to the table in a way that is meaningful in this very short window of time that we have to do some of this work? So next slide, please. So in the care plan, right, itself, we're really thinking about this larger kind of understanding. We want to make sure that we have clear understanding what the family's vision is. What is it that they're looking for? Sometimes a visual, like a picture, is really helpful here. Like I've had parents who've come to the table and said, I just want my child to smile again, and this is what it looks like when they do. We put that right on the table so we know what our goal is. So we want families to be able to help us understand what they're looking for. They might be looking for quiet. They might be looking for their child to return to school. We want better performance in school. We want better grades. We want to understand why they're sleeping on the couch. There's lots of reasons reasons what families say, but we want to make sure that we understand what their vision of what success looks like. And how close are we to reaching our family vision is how we're going to measure our success over time. How close are we? And if we're not close, if we haven't been able to resolve what it is that's going on with the young person, then that actually helps us figure out what other interventions need to get in place in order for us to get to sustainability for the planning process, how we don't leave families in the lurch, if you will, once we transition from. And that we recognize that this is a family identified crisis, and the language that families use around that is really important to understand and connect the dot between their definition, right? The parent, the young person themselves, their definition of what that crisis is in connection with what that family vision is, and the language that young people, their families use to explain what it is they're hoping for is just really important, what that crisis looks like and feels like. And that we're monitoring progress, right? We're paying attention to the small steps. All of this work is about small steps. None of it is really about these really gigantic steps of progress that we see over time. And in some ways, we almost worry when the progress is too fast, right? So we want the pendulum to shift very slowly. We want measurable goals and being able to see some progress within that period of time that we're engaged with families. But we want that progress to build momentum so that progress continues once the mobile teams step out. That we're looking at contributing factors or precipitating factors, triggers, if you will, of what has gone on, what is happening. And their triggers are really in lots of places. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out what they are, but they're always triggers to young people's behaviors, whether they're internal or external. There are always triggers that we need to figure out what those patterns are. So it's important for us to be really attentive to what it is that came before. How long did it come before? Did the parents see it coming? You know, parents, when we begin to talk with them, young people, when we talked with them around this idea of contributing factors, really understood a lot of these things. And then we want strategies, big strategies, right? These strategies that are not just going to be for this 8-week period of time. These are our short-term strategies. We want parents, caregivers, young people themselves to have strategies that they can use, that they practice during this period of time, that they can use once we transition, right? And in transition plan, it's always the professionals who are stepping out. The family stays at the table and engaged in this work. And that's part of the work, is to make sure that there's a functioning team moving forward, that the parent has some understanding, the young person has some understanding about what's happened and when other things can come into place. Next slide, please. And the care plan really looks at these strategies from the perspective of what will work now, what will work later. You know, as an example, we would put together some tools for parents for young people who, for children, if you will. We know that some of the downtime is really problematic when young people or children are not in the school, right? They're not in school because it's summer break. They're not in school because of, they're a break from school for the holidays. Or what do we do in those times where that's where young people tend to get into or have some challenges, right? So we want strategies to address those triggers that we've identified, right? We want those strategies not only to be short-term, we want to give parents, caregivers, the adults in the child's life strategies in which to do. And we want children, youth, and young adults to be able to have strategies as well. We want to be able to identify our desired outcome, which is really the family vision. We identify people who are responsible, who's going to do what, and then we're going to support them in those goals. We're going to identify the type of support and the units of support and the frequency of contact and progress to date and any barriers that get in the way. Next slide, please. So the question, right, for us is there medical necessity to the work, right? So in the next step, can we identify that medical necessity? I would argue that any teenager on any given day meets the medical necessary. Listen, I am the aunt of 19 young people. I can tell you even young people who are doing really well struggle at sometimes, and we would say, yeah, they meet the medical criteria or the medical necessity for outpatient, inpatient, for residential care. So we want to be able to determine that they meet some criteria. There's a reason that we're moving to stabilization services. And we want to be able to determine that not just in this medical necessity way, but really in language that parents and caregivers and young people themselves really can understand why these services and supports necessary. And to get to Rachel's question around seeing the bedroom, this 8 weeks of stabilization, A, is voluntary, and B, is part of helping parents understand what our role is at the table. Seeing the child's bedroom, sometimes parents need to understand why, seeing the child's bedroom can be really helpful in just identifying what is happening. So in asking the question doesn't mean that if they don't allow you to see the bedroom, you're not going to provide the service. They may not even allow you to see the house. That doesn't mean we don't provide the service. We provide the service, but as one of the goals we want to get to is helping parents understand why it's important that some of these tools are helpful for us, right? So we want to be able to explain and be able to help both that young person and the family understand how this will benefit them. What is the purpose of this work is in the long-term benefit to both the young person and the family. And are they ready? We always have to ask this question, are they ready for any intervention we're going to put in? Because even the best interventions in the world, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, that I'm a big fan of trauma-focused CBT, but it is a great intervention that if used at the wrong time can be really harmful, not just in the short term with young people, but in the long term, because in the long term, if it hasn't been helpful, they're not willing to go back, right? And so we want to make sure that we understand when and how young people are ready for this. Next slide, please. And remember, we're talking about family, school, and community. All of this has to be part of the conversation. We're not just talking about one place, right? We're not just talking about the young person's behavior. The difference between an adult model of care and a child, youth, and young adult model of care is that child, youth, and young adult model of care recognizes that child's shift in changing behavior has a tremendous impact on the parent and the parent's ability to move. In other words, when young people escalate, parents escalate. And sometimes when parents escalate, young people escalate. And so we want to make sure that we're really thinking through how it is we're going to support that family through this work. It is a family-driven model and focus, and that we're going to pay attention to what's going into school in terms of grades, in terms of behavior in the classroom, and attendance at school, all important for us to understand. And the role of the community. How is the young person doing in their community? Do they have community activities? Do they have friends? Do they, are there extracurricular things that they enjoy doing? Did they get kicked out of them? Like, we need to understand all of those pieces for young folks. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the things we want to pay attention to, right? So we want to be know that this is like the service array, the formal service array that we get to pull from, right? We get to think about, do they need outpatient? Are they ready for outpatient? Are they going to say, therapy, I love therapy, my therapist is the best? Because that is what we're shooting for, right? What we don't want is young people to say, it's horrible, it's torture, and I'm never going to go back, because then they don't. We want to think about the use of peer support and any kind of youth peer support where there's engagement with young people is really helpful. For parents, we want to make sure that parents are connecting to other parents. And so there are ways to go about that are really important within this work. We want to think about intensive outpatient. And I just want to say, we want to be very careful in the use of intensive outpatient, because the movement of a young person off the developmental path can be really problematic and concerning. We want to use intensive in-home supports whenever possible, because they work around this idea of keeping young people in that developmental path, right? So whatever we can do to keep young people in the classroom, in the activities that they believe are really helpful for them, the better off we are in the long term. We want to think about support services, both in the short term and the long term, how to connect families. And this gets into other things, right? We want to make sure that there's stability in for families to be able to access food, housing, and all of the other supports in the social service network. How do we help families access those things? How do we make sure that we get to some level of sustainability? Respite is important, but I will say that respite is not always in that paid world. We can use community-based respite opportunities. That includes making sure that young people can connect to things like YMCA's, after-school activities. That our goal is to actually have that young person engaging in the community, which will create some respite for parents and their ability to do things like get food shopping done and making sure the house is taken care of, and sometimes just taking that deep breath. That's really important. And certainly we want to think about occupational therapy and whether it's available for some young folks. This is just, a basic. This is not all inclusive. Next slide, please. And then safety planning. When we think about safety, we want to think about the young person's safety, the family safety, the community safety, and the workforce. And sometimes in the conversation around, safety, we only hear about workforce, we only hear about children. And I want to argue that we need to worry about all of these things, right? And we need to be thoughtful about the young person's safety, the family safety, the workforce safety, and community safety. But in that conversation, we also have to do the risk reward kind of understanding. We can't just take into consideration one or the other, the young person's safety. We have to think about the family safety as well. So when we think about it, we need to think not just in the short term around, is this safe right now? We also have to think, what are the long-term implications of, as an example, having a young person admitted to an inpatient unit, because they have long-term implications that we really need to be part of our risk assessment and be thinking about. Is the risk reward totally based on making sure that the workforce stays safe? Like, we need the safe workforce, there's no doubt about it, but we also need skilled workforce who know how to engage and when they engage. So when we're thinking about safety planning, we really want to be thinking about all of these things and be working through, have a process internally within organizations to think through the safety from all angles, right? Do we need to just send more staff? Do we need to make sure that we understand that community? Do we need to not go right now? There are a lot of ways, like, do we need to meet that young person in their school or in a different part of their community? In your organizations, we had a safety group, right, that talked about these things on a regular basis, so that we had clarity around any shifts and changes in the community environment, as an example. So just to put this on your radar, really important that there's lots of training, support, conversations, that we're open to dialogue with our workforce, with our young people, and with our families around us. Next slide. And the crisis and soothing plans, which I think are really, really important to just not think about them as safety plans, right? We do want a safety plan. And by the time we leave, we want to make sure that we have good grounding in the idea of safety, right? However, we also want to make sure that there are tools in there to make that happen. And that's really what the soothing plan does, right? It talks about the triggers, who can help, how will we communicate? And we think about the child's safety sensory diet. Next slide, please. And focus on engagement, right? So this is all about engagement. It's about engagement with communities. It's engagement with partners. It's engagement with young people and their families and their schools and their pediatricians, right? It's all about how do we engage. Next slide. This is some of the things to think about on engagement, right? It's about connection. It's about listening. It's about organization. We need to be interested, understanding, supportive, and empathic. And by all of these things, and by the way, from my perspective, systemic care is all about relationships. Relationships are all about engagement, and it's about building within organizations all of these tools to make sure that the teams themselves, not only are trying to do these things on their own, but that they're really, incorporated into how you do business on a daily basis. If that's true, then the workforce will feel it. They'll feel connected. They'll feel listened to. They'll feel that they have the tools for organization, that you're interested, that you're understanding of their experiences, and that you have tools to help them when the workforce is challenged with some challenging behaviors that both young people and families might show, right? So all of those pieces are really important in this work. And I think next slide, I think that might be Tim. So I'm going to just ask real quick if there's any questions. I'm happy to take them. If you want to put them in the chat, I'll answer them in the chat, or if you have a quick question now, I'll take that. Okay, Tim.
Okay, good morning, everybody. You can go to the next slide. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be able to kind of just give a focus on the stabilization part of the Connecticut model that we've been doing now for 12 or 13 years. I just want to say out of the gate that I gave you, we have 3 or 4 different really slide decks. I've updated them for this presentation. I gave you the whole thing. I'll go through the front part of this because it's repetitive to some of the slides you just saw with Liz, and then really focus on the back end. I just want to start off by just reiterating how Liz closed. If you want my opinion about the 3 top competencies for MRSS staff, it's engagement number 1, engagement number 2, and engagement is number 3. And if you really take a strength-based, family-centered approach, both in the acute phase to stabilize the acute crisis and in the follow-up stabilization phase, it's going to be hard to do it wrong. And I just also want to reiterate the whole purpose of really developmentally responding face-to-face assessments for kids is that you get so much more information. It's not uncommon, with due respect to parents and caregivers, for them to be in a parallel crisis where their assessment may not be as accurately as you would hope for over the phone. So it is really imperative as a best practice to be receiving that face-to-face. And so if you don't get into the bedroom, not a big deal. You're going to get a lot of information by being present there. So these are the phases in Connecticut, and we're just going to be focusing on the stabilization component of this. Next slide. And then here, this is again outlining the full Connecticut model. I think the real piece here, a couple points I wanted to highlight is that we have the same clinician in Connecticut and potentially the team member who is not necessarily a licensed professional. All of our crisis responders in Connecticut are licensed mental health master's trained people who are licensed or license eligible. We're switching that right now to add the peer support and then well-trained peer support that will be going live with our next Medicaid state plan amendment application. So that's being changed. But in Connecticut, we have a 6-week follow-up stabilization period. I kind of agree with Liz. Ours is easy. If you don't close the episode of care at the 6-week mark, is not a big deal. We don't monitor that. I mean, we do collect that data. We know exactly how many family situations go beyond 6 weeks, and they're often necessary. In fact, we saw that happen during the pandemic when staffing shortages increased and wait lists increased. But I just did want to highlight that. And then in Connecticut, we have this statewide call center. We're already fully integrated with 988, and that's already going very, very well. Our 988 phone system is being answered, I think, at the 3rd or 4th fastest rate in the country right now. So they're doing very well. We have the provider network, and then we also happen to have Performance Improvement Center who helped me manage the system for many, many years. Next slide. We are very excited. Connecticut had not been 24/7. We are going live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, starting January 1st. So we're really excited about that. Our benchmark is, these are our goals, but our benchmark to be responsive is 45 minutes or less, both pre-pandemic, and now we're getting back to an average face-to-face time of 30 minutes. Just to give you a little context for Connecticut, I know many of you know we're a small state, so sometimes people will compare the state to their local county. We have 3.5 million residents. We have 800,000 children. And so we do, you'll see our data in a little bit, but we basically are in the 17 to 20,000 calls annually. And we will go to up to 15,000 episodes of care. So I just put that in context for you. And for us in Connecticut, we can drive north to south in about 60 minutes. and we can drive east to west in 2 hours. So that is a good kind of just a context for Connecticut. Again, we want rapid response and stabilization. We built that whole continuum into the same model. Next slide. So in terms of, again, more, we specifically want to be very responsive. The first one was being really focused on being responsive to families. These goals are being responsive to the other supportive people. We're going to focus on schools because it's such an important piece of the work we do for kids. EDs, police, foster families are the other big populations that we focus on, and then a lot of the special populations, and particularly ID and DD. We do a lot of work with all the EDs in Connecticut, and then we really focus on reducing the high-end acute levels of care. Next slide. Connecticut funds these services with a very strong state general fund support on this. We also have a robust reimbursement rate on the Medicaid side, and we also bill private and commercial insurances, whom early on in the process were very reluctant to pay. And over the years, as our success and our reputation grew, most of the commercial carriers in Connecticut, in fact, all of them at this point, reimburse for mobile crisis. The bigger issue is because of the acuity of the work, we not always able to bill. And so we really do rely on that base general fund dollars so that providers, if they can bill Medicaid and commercial insurances, they will. This is just a quick map of Connecticut. And I just wanted to highlight again, it's fully integrated already with 988. So we've been doing very well on that. Next slide. So here again, these are kind of all the pieces that we really work hard on in Connecticut, just highlighting the stabilization, but also this, again, follow-up. And we built right out of the gate into our system, 12, 13 years ago, a very robust ability for psychiatric consultation. Most of the providers do that through APRN, but a number of them do have child and adolescent psychiatrists. I'm sorry, I missed that last question. Let me just go back to that question. How have you created capacity to function as a crisis center, mobile crisis outreach, and also provide follow-up stabilization long-term? So I'm not sure I'm following the first section of this. Regina, you want to come off and just ask your question?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, yeah, no, I'm just curious. Currently, our county functions as a crisis center and also does mobile crisis outreach. And I'm just wondering how you were able to also increase capacity to also provide the longer term follow-up services.
Yeah, so we're literally right now building 4 crisis centers. So our mobile system pre-existed the crisis center work. So there was a standalone. We have 6 major providers covering the entire state. They have 14 locations, and they're designed to be able to reach any part of their territory in 45 minutes or less. And we purchased and built into our mobile response system both the acute crisis stabilization component and the follow-up stabilization and linkage to long-term care. So it's been a part of our model for some time. What we're working heavily on right now is that full integration with the 2 new additional levels of care that we're actually rolling out. We're rolling out those crisis centers, those 23-hour assessment centers, and then we are also adding 1 to 14-day bedded units to try to, for those kids that just really, really need it, but we'd like to get them out rapidly. And so the connection to mobile crisis for both of those level of care is a priority for us to be focusing on right now. So I appreciate the question. Thank you. And then finally, again, just highlighting in this slide, the referral and linkages to ongoing care. I just want to say one of the things that's been hugely helpful for our workforce development training, and that is training all of the responders in the intensive wraparound process. You can't do a full fidelity model based care coordination model in terms of creating child and family team meetings and having multiple meetings and all that, but you can shorten that down. And for us, what we've been really focused on is the values and principles that underline the care coordination and the wraparound, intensive wraparound, that is getting the parents back in the center of their treatment. So I do think there is a little bit of difference, not always. In the acute phase, the family's asking and needing for support and help in that stabilizing that acute crisis. The stabilization component is really about re-empowering the parent and the caregiver to be back in the center, cheering them on, helping them to know and understand that they can do this, and then trying to do it as much as possible with the informal and natural supports. I know there's a lot of people and a lot of interested, and Connecticut has a very robust service array, but you'll see in our data that really a lot of it is informal supports and natural supports. You don't need to always have a high clinical service. You know, outpatient is our #1 linkage back to whom there ever other referral was. And we'll show you that data in a little while, but bottom line is a lot of it is empowering and making families feel back in control. So I don't want to underestimate that. And I do think the wraparound values and principles are really useful in that training. Next slide, please. So again, here I should have updated these slides again because the mobile crisis highly trained. We do think it's important to be highly trained, and there are professionals, and you'll see that Connecticut's model started off as a heavy professional model. We are adding people with lived experience and peers. And so that was really an important step for us. And again, that's going to be, we have always had that ability. The providers have had that built into their contract to use that, but we have not had it built into the Medicaid reimbursement. And we'll be updating our SPA, our state plan amendment, in the next month or two, and really adding that, the peer support, the level and lived experience, particularly in this phase of the linkage to ongoing care and stabilization. The other piece here, just really highlighting, we think it's really, really important to have a well-trained workforce. We put a lot of emphasis on both the pre-service as much as can be trained in the before they get going live. And then in that first year, we have a number of core modules I'll share in a second. And then we also do ongoing in-service, and we service every responder every year, and we set our training plan according to what they request. And we know that we have to be very, very flexible, offering each training multiple times, and when we're in person around the state, and then at different times. So morning, late afternoon, evening, and then sometimes even later into the evenings. Next slide. It's just as a few standardized, the core modules 1 and 2 are really been our baseline. Those change occasionally, but we put a lot of emphasis in the whole crisis assessment, the suicide assessment. We do have the ability to emergency cert kids directly in. We very, very rarely use it. Before we had that available, we had a handful of situations where parents didn't agree with us in the need of really the safety of the child. And I'm really talking about the most needy kids who are really worrisome. And so it is just there, not to be contrary to parent desire or need, but just when they may not be recognizing the high level of need, the mobile responder can share with them that, you know, they would probably use the emergency certificate. And so most of that time, parents agree to take their children directly to the hospital. So that's there. Next slide. And we do a variety of ongoing updated topics there. So this just really, again, highlights, you know, the first phase of stabilizing the acute crisis and then really working on what is the long-term need that the child has, what's the unmet need. It's that proactive prediction that this child may have another crisis in the future. So what is the current response in the current crisis, and then what is the future proactive crisis safety planning? And that we literally do a proactive crisis safety planning for the future. And then we really do try to meet and link develop a clear plan of care that really addresses the identified need. Next slide. So many of you familiar, it was the Newtown crisis shooting that occurred in Connecticut. The following year, this is a 2012 tragedy. The following year, they required every school district in the state of Connecticut to develop an MOA. If you're interested in seeing those, they are posted on our website. I'm not sure it's here, but I'll put it in the chat, but it's Mobile Crisis EMPS. EMPS is just Emergency Mobile Crisis Psychiatric Services, which was our old name, but people still hold on to it. CT for Connecticut.org. So that's Mobile Crisis EMPS CT.org. There's tons of data there that you can see. And there's also the MOAs, but that made our linkage to schools a huge priority. Next slide. Connecticut law also allows for us to work with kids in crisis without parental consent. That is not the best practice. So we do really work hard on focusing on getting the parent consent, but if they're at work or unavailable, we will respond to the school, we will assess the child there, and then we will follow up with the parents. So here within the framework, again, the high priority, all of our providers are required to do annually routine outreach activities. We require no less than 12 a year, which averages to 1 a month. And we monitor the responsive rate within each area of the state per 1,000. And if you fall below the statewide benchmark of how many kids you're serving per 1,000 in your area, we actually double the number of outreach activities so that you have to do to 24. And the far majority of those outreach activities are really focused on schools. Next slide, and I think I saw a question pop up. Stabilization follow-up in-house or contract out. We do it all in-house. These are all the same clinicians. So when the call comes to the call center in the state of Connecticut, it's a statewide call center. They warm transfer to the clinician. Most of the providers, the clinician answering the next call is the responding clinician. So there's not an intermediate person. Now, a couple of our providers do have somebody answering the phones and then linking to the clinician. But so then the clinician responds. Again, we are just going. So there's no there's no screening on that triaging. They're just taking information and they're going. So they're mobile. Usually, I think our average call is less than 2 minutes. On the receiving end after the warm transfer, it's usually doing the safety check, any guns, dogs, that kind of thing. And then if there's any directions related to that. And then once that clinician engages, that clinician has that all the way through the stabilization period. So that once you're engaged, you get the clinician's cell phone number. And if you have another acute phase, you call the cell phone of your clinician rather than back through the main call center. So you have that kind of personalized experience. And then most of our providers, that the responding person will follow it all the way through linkage and ongoing stabilization. But again, sometimes there's a team, and sometimes it's handed off to a peer or kind of a paraprofessional type. So here, when calling this, we also have this experience where Parents can say no, they don't want to, you have mobile crisis, particularly if they had a bad experience for one reason or another, or particularly if they're not sure, I'm not sure what's going to happen at the school and they deny. We will still respond to the school and support the school without speaking to the parent. Some may feel like that's not as family-centered as it should. In those contexts, again, every effort is still made to contact the parent and ask if it would be okay for them to speak to their child. So we still do put a lot of emphasis on the family-centered component of that, but we also feel strongly, and again, some of this is driven by the legislation and as a result of the Newtown shooting, that they really do want to be sure we're responding and supporting schools. Next slide. This slide is pretty much an extension of the previous one. Next slide. So when calling, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. Call volume. So our peak just before the pandemic was 20,000 calls and 15,000 episodes of care. We're on pace for that in this new year that we're in currently. And this was last year's data. So, and the difference between these calls is a variety of things. So just about every call that is designed, that these 13,322 episodes of care are the families who wanted mobile crisis. There's a variety of callers who get in their mix there. That may just want to talk to somebody. There's a whole host of callers that get into the system that are there. So these are the ones that are turning into full face-to-face episodes of care. Next slide. Yeah, so our primary caller up until that law in MOA was parents, and these two pieces of data were flip-flopped for the first up and for the first 6-7 years. Families were about 44% and schools were about 40%. Once those MOAs went into play, 44% of all of our calls are from schools, 40% are from parents, and then the next highest caller is emergency departments. So again, they did drop back down to that family during the peak of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay. This is where we start to get in specifically. So this will give you a little bit indication. So in our stabilization, although we have up to 6 weeks now, again, Connecticut has a very robust system. So this may allow us to have this short length of stay to linkage to ongoing care. So you see the medium and the mean 17, 22 days, and then we had 8% exceeding the 45-day length of stay. And our benchmark is to try to not to get beyond 5%. Again, that 8% and that 5%, we pay attention to it, but most of the time, the reason they go beyond that is because they're waiting for a linkage that just hasn't occurred. Want to make sure that it's just not a case that they just didn't close the case and finish the paperwork. Again, I think we're assuming at this point, our hypothesis, there is an increase because of the staff shortage in
Looks like Tim's freezing a bit. We could probably finish the sentence. Staff shortage across the country and in Connecticut. He's back.
Sorry. You want to go to the next slide? Okay. So am I back? Okay. Sorry about that. So here's this data we've been collecting for a number of years, and it does flip-flop once in a while. We did see anxiety at the peak of the pandemic outpaced depression. This is back down to what we were seeing before the pandemic. Again, this is information you can sit with. Next slide. And here specifically are the ones related to schools or school problems. Again, we break it down a little bit more, emotional, behavioral, social, academic. And then this is the other thing, you know, before the pandemic, we were running about 15% of kids we service were expelled or suspended. That just really speaks to schools not wanting kids, I think, and not wanting to maintain kids who have mental health needs. And so we were glad to see that number go down during the pandemic, but it went down for a lot really around the volume rather than around about trying to keep kids in the school and community. I think we're starting to see that again climb. You can see it going up. We're worried about that getting back up to what it was. We're really trying hard to work with schools. Next slide. And this again just shows you the volume over the course, and you can see the dip, and now we're on the way back to the full calls. And this is the call and episode volume next over multiple years. Next slide. And then top referral sources over the multiple years. So law enforcement, there's a question. Next slide, and I'll answer that question. So we work really hard not to go out with police at all, again, unless it's just the safety of the clinician. And it's a very good working relationship. Most of the time, if law enforcement is there for the safety of the clinician, they just often will pull out front. They won't even get out of their car. They'll just be present just to be sure that there is a safety of the clinician. That is really the primary area of usage. And we, in Connecticut, we have a very good working relationship with all the CIT. And in Connecticut, we also do CITY. The CITY is the youth component, and our mobile crisis clinicians, our managers of that, actually do the training with law enforcement. And so we highlight that because they do a really great job of establishing working relationships with law enforcement. So we really put a lot of emphasis on each area, each contractor having a good working relationship with each school and school district and each law enforcement entity in their district too. So this slide just shows you really 34% of are really connected to outpatient. The none and the 30% is the out. What is the 30%? I'm missing a comment there. I had that. Hold on one second. Referred back to the original provider. For some reason, it got deleted on that. So 30% get referred back to their original provider. 34% are outpatient, and you can see community-based, intensive, extended day. Out of home is really, really rare. Residential is really, really rare. And most of the time when we're responding, those kids were already headed that way. And we're just trying to stabilize them for whatever reason. We work really hard to keep kids in their home and community. And I would echo again Liz's earlier statements, really doing everything you can to make sure the only kids going into the high acute levels are really in that need, because getting them out sometimes is hard, and getting them back into family and community is sometimes working really hard. None is, again, that a lot of, quote, none is often those informal and natural supports and not necessarily needing the professional service. Just a couple more slides. I know I'm coming to an end. Next slide. Yeah, this is really the most intensive to the least intensive. And I really should have highlighted the box on this. I usually do that, but alternative community setting, short-term residential, psychiatric residential, state hospital, those should be kind of like this bright red. Those are the highest areas. Again, we work really hard to avoid that. And all the other really is just really talking about that kind of wraparound philosophy and trying to keep kids at home in the community. So that's really the main focus of all the work. Next slide. This I wanted to put in here because this is the federal slide on 988. And if you've seen this on the federal side and you see it here, they talk about resolving 80% of all calls by phone. And that in Connecticut, because we use this slide, I call it out every single time, every time we present it on 988, anytime I have a chance and say, the model that the adult system across the country is promoting is not good for kids, and that we really do in Connecticut. Our benchmark is 90% of all callers are going to receive that face-to-face assessment. Next slide. And the next two slides I'll just leave with you. This was our return on investment. I didn't have a chance to update this, but it basically shows you the math on how we are supporting the return on investment and saving the state of Connecticut big dollars as a result of some just very conservative math. This is just averted hospitalizations as defined by the emergency department, who are referring a child to the mobile crisis system, the mobile response system in Connecticut, as an alternative to sending them to inpatient. And so these are categorized by the ED, not by mobile. And this is a very, very conservative number. We know of many other points where we're doing this, but we come up with about $5.4 million of savings when our total investment is 14 million. So we have a bunch of other areas that we're looking on return on investment. And then the next slide is just a little bit more detail on Connecticut. And again, it's a reference there for you if you are interested in the future. And then the final slide is just these areas where we're really focusing on improving our system. The January 1st 24/7 go live. And we're in contract negotiations for the 23-hour crisis assessment centers, 4 of those, and 4 accompanying short-term subacute beds. And we are looking at implementing geo-tracking and real-time appointment scheduling at this point right now also. So thank you. And I think this is an opportunity. Turn it back to you, Jen.
Great. Thank you, Tim. That was a lot of great information. I just want to give you one quick chance to see if you can answer this question around your partnerships with the police and their role in mobile crisis, and then we can move on.
Yeah, that was, sorry, I did. So again, there are 2 ways to do that. One, we just try to be sure that we're in very good working relationships at the local level with law enforcement, so that law enforcement feels confident in the system. And the second way is we've partnered with them on this CIT training. And when we partnered with them on the CIT training, the secondary gain out of that training is the relationship that's been established with the law enforcement entities who do that training locally with our mobile crisis managers. And so what that has done is really increased the law enforcement ability to trust the credibility of the mobile response system. So I use that example because the secondary gain, other than the training together, has been greater than the training together, and that the relationships that have been established really very often they're on a first name basis and cell phone, they exchange cell phones. And so when law enforcement is out there and they don't want to be dealing with a kid through a legal means and really want a mental health response, they can call the manager, or they can call through the 211, call through the call center.
Great. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think a lot of it's education and relationships with the police for sure. So
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, well, we will stretch our arms a little bit and move to breakouts. If you can move to the next slide, Cecilia. Oh, and questions. Here's contact information. Okay, so we will have 3 breakouts. If you want to move to the next slide to show folks identify which county you're working in and your number, and then the breakouts will pop up. If everyone can just take note of that. Just remember your number, 1, 2, or 3. And then just show the next slide really fast, and we'll just give people a preview. These are the questions we're going to walk through. So just we'll take about a half an hour, come back at 11:35, and hopefully you all will have some good conversations within your groups to talk this through and apply some of the content that you learned earlier. So Brittany, we have moved to Brittany as our tech host. So Brittany will help us pop up the breakouts, and we will move to those. Wonderful.
Alrighty, I did go ahead and place the instructions in the chat as well. So again, just take note of the county that you are in and go to that specific room. There are 3 rooms. And all trainers, you guys also have been assigned to your specific rooms as well. If you have any issues, please let us know.
Thank you, Brittany.
Is this our breakout? Maybe?
Yes, it is.
Oh, hi. Natia's with me. We're sharing space.
Okay.
Partners in every way.
Alrighty. Just make sure if you're on 2 devices to connect on both devices.
Yeah, she logged
Sarah-
out. She was in the call, but when we did the breakouts, she logged out so we could be together.
Okay, no worries. And
Isn't it
Sarah,
okay?
which one are you in? I'm sorry.
Can you send me to the one that's the Eastern Shore counties? Wacomico, Cecil,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. Is anyone else having issues connecting? You would click more along the bottom of your Zoom screen. Select breakout.
Zoom, I'm having trouble. I don't see where I should click. To join. I need to join too.
Who's
Yeah,
who's
this is
speaking?
Tom Merrick, and I don't see a place that says more to click.
Me either.
Me 3.
Me either, guys.
Give me a second because multiple people are speaking, so I'm trying to catch you. So who is the first person that needs help? Tom Merrick.
Yeah, well, I wasn't
What count?
first, but I'm one,
Okay, what county are you in?
number 1.
And this is Ann Geddes. I need to go to 2.
All right. You both should see your invitation. Who else needs assistance?
This is Carlos Mackel. I need to go to 3. It's for Prince George's County, correct?
3 is room 2.
This is Marie Ledek. I need to go to number 2, please.
All right. You should have your invitation. Is anyone else?
This is
Gina
Tiffany
Greenhood.
Fry.
Great, thank you.
This is Gina Greenhood. I'm from Prince George's.
Yes, 1, 2.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Tiffany Frotz, and I'm from Garrett County. I think it was room 1.
Yes. You should have your invitation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Everyone else, are you seeing the option along the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can select more and open the breakouts?
Brittany, are you able to tell when everyone's back? Just let me know.
Yep, all rooms are closing now, so everyone should be back.
Jen, I tried to get
and-
question
okay.
5. I didn't make it.
That's okay. Okay. Well, if we are all back, we'll just do a quick report out of each of the groups. I made the mistake of not appointing somebody to do that report out. So I will take on and represent the western and southern area of the state. And so what we talked about a little bit, Washington County is really the only county at this point that has really moved to testing out the stabilization very early on. Brooke Curbs told us a little bit about it. She's only a week or two, the county's only a week or two into it, so it doesn't have a lot of data, a lot of experience to share. But I think the whole group in all felt hope that this service could help fill a gap for children and families, and really saw it as a nice fit to insert into the continuum they have, with the hope that RTC placements could go down, stabilization of placements for children in the home could increase, ER, diversion of ER visits and such. And so I think I think there's hope that this could be really helpful for families. And we talked a little bit about the differences of what this is really about and how this is different from targeted case management. And so I think the state will just continue the conversation and test this out and, have the support from Liz and Tim and other states that have put this in practice to really figure out how to build this up in these areas of the state. So that's really all we had to report out on. If anyone else has anything to contribute from my group, please jump in. If not, we can move to the next group. So Liz, this was your group number 2, which you had a good swath of the state. So if you want to take it from here to whoever's reporting out from your group.
So that'd be me. We're just doing question 1.
No, you could just share a report out of your conversation that you had that you feel like would be beneficial to the whole group.
So I'll do it by questions because that's how we organized it. So for the first question, it's really getting the families to feel safe and comfortable, to be open to engaging in services, short-term and long-term, kind of downsizing the services, not having 50 workers in the home at once, having that good communication, letting this be the primary access point for families. Another goal is to have the families have an overall positive experience so that they are amenable to re-engaging in services in the future. For a lot of families, this is their first entry into the system, so we want it to be a positive one. We talked about demystifying the behavioral health system. It is a very confusing system, but by helping the families feel engaged and supported, we can really make inroads for the entire family. And then we talked about the continuity of care with the warm handoffs, allowing families to feel more engaged, and the importance of those relationships. For question 2, it was not losing opportunities to engage with families quickly by having the service available. If you wait too long, sometimes families don't recall why they needed help or they minimize those services. So this is that opportunity really, really quickly to start to engage. That feeling of when they call for help actually comes and will engage with them. Families rate the MHSS and MRSS services very highly because they feel so supported. And then it's the least restrictive environment for kids. It's home-based, it's family-based. So they're not going into institutions where it's really, really disruptive. For question 3, we go from crisis to stabilization to maintenance fairly seamlessly, and that's kind of the whole intent, that a lot of the work is done behind the scenes for that, and the families, all they know is they're getting what they need when they need it. Programs are, we had some programs that we're looking to expand their current shorter model to the up to 8 weeks. And that up to 8 weeks really does allow for a lot of individualized programming for families to really meet them where they are with what they need. And then using lots of decision matrices with the care plan. Question 4 was the last question we got to. So some counties have a lot of task forces, a lot of opportunities for formal and informal partnerships with other agencies, the opportunity within the local care teams to create those relationships with the other partners. Staff retention is a big one. The longer the staff are there, the more they engage with other agencies. A lot of community presentations about services. And then I think everyone was agreeable to increasing the ability to partner with DDA and the services available there. That's maybe one area that we can do a lot better in. If I missed anything, my group, just yell out.
I appreciate you getting to the bonus questions 4 and 5. So they're not on the screen. So, but yeah, that's great with the partnerships and sort of thinking that through further. Great. Well, thank you, Catherine. That brings us to group number 3. Sarah,
All right.
Yep, that's
Yeah,
it.
so my group silently nominated me to report out. So I will do so, and I will do my very best, but I hope if I miss something that folks will feel free to jump in and share as well. So we sort of started talking about really wanting families to have an experience of them, first of all, really, being in the driver's seat and really getting to make choices about their care, the care for their family, the care for their children. But then also for families really to experience a lot of consistency and cohesiveness. And so really thinking about how mobile response and stabilization integrates into the larger community and how folks are understanding how to access those services, how those services interplay with other supports that are available, and helping those other services and supports themselves to really get what mobile response and stabilization is, and how kind of everyone can connect together, knowing, sort of getting into some of those next questions, knowing that families are going to transition out of mobile response and stabilization services. And if they've had this experience within those services of feeling really like partners, really like they're making their own decisions about their care, that we want that experience that in many cases is creating hope and positive outcomes for the families to be able to continue on into that next phase of care. And what does that look like? And what are the partnerships that we need to build? What are the additional community supports that maybe don't even exist yet that we need to start thinking about as far as that connection and warm handoff? When we talked about sort of the enhancement and the benefit, one of the things that those folks who are already providing these services talked a little bit about is just the opportunity to partner with the entire family and to think about the entire family and how that really changes things for a lot of caregivers who are experiencing high levels of stress, right? That's even impacting their physical health, and how we're really able to think not only about what the young person's needs may be and get help and support for them, but thinking about the parent and thinking about how we're really individualizing care. So we're not only thinking about what supports we're adding, we're thinking about like what's there that isn't helpful right now. Like what can we subtract off of people's plates so that they can get back to the business of like being families and spending time doing like fun and happy things with their families instead of like being in classes on how to be a better parent all day long. So I thought that was a really cool thing that the team who's doing this work brought up. And then I think we sort of already touched on 3 a little bit, but really thinking about how we're expanding the services that are available, especially on the shore, not always having access to some of the services that might be more available centrally here in our state. And so thinking about if we really want to keep, families to sort of that 8 weeks of service, that we know we're going to have to build some things out then on the back end that can continue for those families who might continue to need a little bit support, for whom 8 weeks is not enough. How are we creating those opportunities for continued care and warm handoffs? Did I miss anything, group, or does anyone want to chime in? All right.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Really great. Okay, well, we have about 10 minutes left and we just have another section to get through, so we can do that and pause for questions at the end if we have time. If you can move to the next slide, Cecilia. Okay. Sarah and I are your point persons, people for Maryland that have been providing you with both technical assistance and coaching and training. So I just want to review sort of what's available in Maryland and how we're working with the state. So there's sort of 3 different types of technical assistance and coaching that you may be receiving. Well, hopefully everyone does fall into one of these categories, but just to review it so folks are clear. We have the general TA that is this, where we meet every other month with our collaborative. And in addition to meeting with the collaborative, we originally met with each county, which we've met with all 24 counties at this point, to review the environmental scan data that was done a year or so ago, get a better understanding of your crisis system in each county, since you're also very different. Walking through the readiness tool to really break down those 55 indicators and how to customize for children and families, and sort of help tease out the areas that your county might want to prioritize and move your work on. We certainly have been available for ad hoc meetings for anyone that wants to consult with us and pull in any expertise with best practice. And again, we have the bi-monthly collaborative meeting. So that's the general TA available to everybody in the state, every county. And then we've moved into in-depth TA with a group of counties. And these are counties that were early adopters with this work and have been supporting BHA in providing the data to the federal government as part of this funding stream. And really also counties that had nothing in their jurisdictions, and working with them and trying to get RFPs on the street, really get things moving from, below sea level. And so those were counties that we're working with, meeting with monthly to really try to get things rolling. And then for counties, and this is where Sarah comes in, that have gone through the curriculum and are ready to the providers and are ready to really put this into practice. Sarah is now meeting with those counties to support the practice and the training that was received through the curriculum. So those are sort of, everybody should be fitting into one of those buckets. And if you feel like you're not, please holler. But everybody at this point, we believe we've met with and have really good contacts, good names and faces, and have really enjoyed meeting with everyone throughout the last year. Next slide. So just in summary, all 24 are getting the general TA, 10 counties, oversight agencies are getting the in-depth TA, which is covering 17 counties because of regional approaches. And then 5 providers, which covers 11 counties, are getting the coaching meeting with Sarah on a monthly basis. Next slide. Upcoming trainings, we have the next curriculum. This is a 3rd cohort that is being run November 30th through December 2nd, 3 full days. Hopefully, if you have not attended, you're able to. Sarah keeps everybody entertained for 3 days, so it's great. So please reach out if you have not and are interested in attending that. We also have the Children's Next CAT training coming up. We tried to adjust the times a little bit to help with workforce flexibility. That registration is not out yet, but that will be out imminently. And those are the dates and the times. So hopefully that will work for some people to flex their time or have those work hours. So we are excited to have more training on the horizon. Please contact us if you have any questions with registration or you feel like you're in the dark around this. Next slide. Here are our contacts for data, TA, training, and the CAT. So you will get the slide deck. You do not need to scribble this down, but we are available to you to support you all through this work and implementation. I feel super excited and proud that Maryland has come really far in the last year. The fact that we've had the opportunity to meet with every county, get a better understanding of where you are, where your priorities are, and to help create that customization for children and families. I'm super thankful for everyone for returning my emails, returning my calls, and joining these. I think they've been great conversations. So I appreciate that and look forward to more meetings and upcoming conversations. We are here to help you, not to create extra work. So people fall into whatever category they can sort of bite off and chew at this time in terms of this work, and want to just meet you all where you are. Next slide. The next couple slides are just resources that we just keep available to you all. We'll continue to add as we go. Want to make sure you have them and read them as you can. Next couple slides to get to the end. Okay, so these are our next collaborative setup, January, March, and May. I hope you can mark your calendars. Hope they don't conflict with too many other existing meetings, but with enough time, I hope you all can schedule them on your calendar. We love having representation from every county. It just enables the breakouts to be more robust, and want to make sure this material and this content gets out. I want to just give a shout out to Tim Marshall today for joining. Really appreciate your presentation. And Connecticut, he may not have patted himself on the back enough, but the data that they are collecting in Connecticut is amazing. The way the reporting is done is incredible. So I probably can actually send out some of his great work and track to show you what Maryland can get to in terms of tracking data, tracking outcomes, because their system and their data CQI system is incredible. And so hopefully Maryland can get there and use Connecticut as an example. We have just a couple minutes left. Does anyone have any questions or any closing remarks BHA may want to provide? If not, I hope everybody has a lovely Thanksgiving and has some delicious sides with their turkey or tofurkey or whatever the main dish might be. And really thank you for your time and look forward to the next meeting in January. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.